lecture today is about denial. Now, ordinarily, when we think of denial, we think of the denial that happens around our drinking, around our use, or around the dependency. There is another kind of denial, however, that this lecture is about that is less talked about, but absolutely as important. And it is the denial of the living problems underneath that addiction. To deny looking at those living problems invites disaster. It is the reason that relapse happens, and it is the source of all switched addictions. Therefore, the absolute importance of looking at and dealing with the denial of the living problems beneath the addiction. Denial is the topic of our discussion today. Denial in a very, very special sense. Now, whenever we talk about denial in terms of chemical dependency or recovering from addictions, it almost always relates to the denial about the use of the substance or the behavior that the addiction is around. So much of treatment or AA is about breaking through that denial that, yes, in fact, I do use. Now, of course, that's a very important understanding of denial. But there is another understanding of denial that is critical, and that simply is this. It is very easy to get sober and yet deny the underlying living problems. And when we deny the underlying living problems that underlie sobriety, then we have short-circuited the quality of our recovery altogether. Now, as a place to begin this discussion, let me introduce to you, or to talk for a moment, about the concept of labels. And labels are very important tools. They are names that we give things. And if things do not have names, we have a very great deal of difficulty talking about them. For example, my father was a plasterer, and there are two different kinds of tools, among others, that plasterers use. One is a rather wedged-shaped tool called a pointer, at least that's what we call it, and it's to get into tight little corners. And the other one is a rectangular tool that at least we call the margin tool. Now, when my dad asked for the pointer, you better not hand him the margin tool. See, you'd catch one alongside the head. And the point is, things have names, and names become very important. Labels also help us to know not just what things are, but what things are not. I mean, if I'm sitting down, then obviously I'm not standing up. If I'm in a car, I'm not in a plane. If I'm a man, I'm not a woman. It tells us what we are not. Now, you say, what does all this have to do with denial? Not too long ago, I was at a meeting, as is frequently happens in meetings nowadays, and people introduced themselves, and I recall this, the young man said, my name is Gary, I'm chemically dependent, codependent, and an adult child. I'm sitting there thinking, what do all these labels mean? What are we talking about? And then another lady said, well, hello, my name is Mary. I'm an addict, I'm an inner child problems, and I have shame. And you think, all right, those are all, what do they mean? What do all of these labels mean? And I think what is happening often in terms of recovery is that people get lost in the labels. And when we get lost in the labels, so often we have no idea where we are. And I want to suggest that in our day and age, there are many labels out there: alcoholic, chemically dependent, drug addict, codependent, inner child, adult child, shame-based. And we're using a great many of these labels, and lots of times we don't understand what they mean. And so we wind up getting really confused. Now, the point of denial here, and I'm talking about denial of the addict, is it's very easy to say, all right, the label that I buy is I'm an alcoholic, I'm chemically dependent, therefore I am not codependent. If I'm chemically dependent, therefore I am not an adult child, for example. And I'm saying that that is very, very dangerous thinking. Think about this. A lovely, beautiful 50-story building. The building cannot exist if there is not a foundation. On the other hand, if all there is a foundation and the building does not rise above that in all of its beauty, what good is the foundation? Recovery from chemical dependency is maybe 15% chemicals, and that is the foundation, and 85% is dealing with the underlying living problems. Now, don't misunderstand me. There cannot be a building without the foundation. It's not that that 15% is not important. Sobriety is of absolute essential necessity if there's going to be any quality of life. But the denial so often is, once I'm sober, the journey basically is over. The denial so often is around the living problems that were there before the addiction happened. They were deepened while the use was going on, and they most certainly remain after there has been an arresting of that addiction. In my 23 years in the field, I don't think that there is any greater delusion that I have seen in recovering addicts' life, recovering alcoholics' lives, that does more damage than the denial of the living problems. Denial of the walk that needs to happen after sobriety has been achieved. Now, let me put it this way. One of the favorite lectures at the treatment centers that I have worked at over the years was a lecture on this little phrase: chemicals medicate pain. And the point is, whether your particular chemical or addiction went through the usual process of use, abuse, dependency, or maybe you were one of those kind of drinkers that, at least in earlier literature, was called the alpha alcoholic, that at that very first drink you knew you were hooked, 14 years old or 12 years old, and that first drink of alcohol, by God, I knew that I was hooked. It did something different to you than it did to other people. These are usually the people that have at least one parent, often two, that also are chemically dependent. So there's no doubt some kind of brain chemistry involved. But whether you leapfrogged over the abuse stage or went through the use to abuse to dependency, the point is, we all wind up, addicts all wind up using the chemical to medicate the pain. Now, if all we do is take the chemical away, what does that leave? See, and of course, what it leaves is the pain. Where this talk was most effective was at a hospital-based treatment center where I worked at a given time. And doing this lecture, the 5th floor was the cancer unit. And the example was, imagine there's some poor devil up there on the cancer unit that has cancer of the bone, terribly, terribly painful. And he's taking morphine to dull the pain. If you take the morphine away from that cancer patient, what do you have left? And of course, what you have left is absolutely excruciating pain. Take the chemical away from the chemically addicted person, what do you have left? And what you have left is your pain. Chemicals medicate pain. The point is, our program can either focus specifically just on the chemical or mainly on the chemical and not on the pain. And if that is the case, then what is left is ungodly, traumatic, hurtful pain. Or our program needs not only to focus on abstinence, not only to focus on clean and sober, but also to focus on that pain, which is where quality of life comes. Now, pain like what? Well, underneath that chemicals medicate pain, underneath pain, put, for example, things like repressed anger. Now, how many recovering alcoholics or significant other alcoholics do you know that don't have anger issues? Either enormous anger at themselves or anger at other people. There are lots of sober, angry folks, and that anger spills out all kinds of ways, tremendously diminishing the quality of life. Or maybe under pain, put intimacy issues. And again, every human heart that ever existed is a hunger for love. We all are a desperate hunger for love. Might not the chemical that you use to medicate the pain, being the fact that there's all kinds of intimacy issues, for some reason perhaps that we don't really understand, there's an enormous difficulty of sharing feelings, or tremendous fear in trying to get close to people? Or might that intimacy issue express itself in the fact that every time you get in a relationship and it starts to work, somehow it falls apart? And in your heart of hearts, you know that you have a lot to do with that relationship falling apart. Or maybe the intimacy is a great deal of difficulty having intimacy with your children or forming a family life. But again, chemicals medicate pain. What is the pain in your life once the chemicals are gone? Oftentimes under that pain, like again, repressed anger, intimacy issues, fear. How much fear is in your life? Fear that robs your life of joy. How much perhaps guilt is in your life? Guilt that is like a dark cloud that you're always walking under. It ruins life. Maybe the need to control, maybe low self-esteem, whatever it may be, chemicals medicate pain. And the denial is that I do not need to work as hard on the life issues causing the pain as I need to pay attention to and to really work on clean and sober. That's the denial. And that is the denial that will and can absolutely kill you. Now, as you think about this and hopefully discuss and really look at that little sentence, chemicals medicate pain, if in fact there is not real effort and energy put at working on these living issues, one of three things or all of these things are going to happen. Number one is not working on your life issues will tremendously limit the quality of your sobriety. You may very well wind up clean and sober. You may very well go to countless meetings. You may be the one that is always going on a 12-step call or making the coffee or doing all those kinds of things. And yet inside, the happiness, the spiritual growth, the serenity, the peace of mind may not be there. Dealing with those life issues is what dictates the quality of our life. The second thing that is guaranteed to happen if in fact we do not work with those life issues is relapse. Chemicals medicate pain. We use chemicals to medicate our pain. If we do nothing to really focus on that pain, then where are we going to go when the pain gets great enough to medicate it again? That's what relapse is about. Relapse is about not taking serious the life issues underneath the addiction. And inch by inch, little by little, we start to march backwards into our stinking thinking and eventually into our physical drunkenness. First comes the mental drunkenness, then comes the physical drunkenness. Where does it come from? From not dealing with our life issues. Or the third thing that can happen, and see how often this may have happened, we switch addictions. It's a sneaky way out of the pain. If in fact the primary addiction in our life that we've used to medicate this pain, say, is chemicals, and we get rid of the chemical, we achieve abstinence but don't deal with the life issues, well, obviously then one way to deal with that life issue, if it's not going to be head on and in a way that works, is to just switch an addiction. Addiction is addiction. And whether it's chemicals or whether we switch it to sex or whether we switch it to food or to work or maybe even to recovery itself, the fact is we are still using this compulsive obsessive behavior as a way of not dealing with our life, and disaster follows. So that is what causes those three terrible banes of recovery, the pitfalls of recovery, the diminished quality of life, relapse, or switched addiction. It's from not dealing with those life issues. Now, let me share with you some of the common ordinary labels or names or traits, whether you want to call it codependency, adult children, inner child. See if you can relate to any of these traits And I would ask you on a score of 1 to 10 to rate yourself on these traits, just to see how much they're in your life. And again, the point is, 1 means no real problem, 10 means it's a very, very big problem. And if you wind up with a lot of high numbers on this little test, then what I'm sharing with you is your program needs to free itself from the delusion and the denial of saying this is not really important, and your program needs to really focus on it. Okay, score of 1 to 10. Let's see how you relate to these. Number 1, repressed anger. Now, at our center, when we do this little exercise, there's always this kind of gasp or, oh, Lord, because almost everyone finds that they are sitting on top of a literal volcano of repressed anger. That's a real living issue. Anger hurts. Anger hurts us, it hurts other people, it destroys our relationships, it destroys the quality of our relationships. So if you have a high number there, it needs to be looked at. All right, as we mentioned before, number 2, intimacy issues. How do you do with intimacy issues? Do you find that intimacy frightens you to death? Do you find the fact that there is so much loneliness in your life because for some reason it seems not able to really make a relationship work? And perhaps it is translated into some behaviors that just destroy your self-confidence and self-esteem? So intimacy issues, 1 to 10, how would you rate that? All right, here's number 3, the need to control, the need to be in charge, the need to take responsibility for outcomes over which I have no control. Do you find that that is really true? As someone in the group one time said, I'm an absolute control freak. Been in recovery for 13 years, and still I'm such an enormous control freak. How much control do you have to have? All right, let's talk about several fears, 1 to 10 again. Fear of rejection. How much is that in your life? How much do you find that fear of rejection, fear of not being accepted, fear of not being good enough, fear of being in situations where you're not in control and somebody may not like you, how much weight does that cause in your life? How about this one? Fear of commitment? That I would love to have a truly loving, ongoing, committed, monogamous relationship. And yet that fear of commitment is so powerful in my life, I just don't seem able to do it. And I'm always tap dancing around, not really getting at the core of things, the issue of things. How much is that part of your life? How about this one? Fear of abandonment. That for some reason, somehow, I live with this abiding sense of fear that I'm going to be betrayed, that I'm going to be left. My expectation is that people will never really be there for me. It is my experience in 20-plus years in this field that you almost never meet a recovering person that is not suffering from a heartful of fear of abandonment. And of course, the reason is because there has been abandonment. 1 to 10. Now, just so far, we have several more of these to go through. How are you doing so far? On your scores, 1 to 10. Again, oftentimes at the center, people will say, before I came in here and took this little test, I was feeling pretty good. Now, geez, I feel depressed. Well, maybe so, but if they're there, they're there. All right, last couple. How about perfectionism? That for me, somehow, no matter what I do, it's never good enough. Somehow, no matter how much I get done, I've never done enough. Somehow, no matter how well I do it, it hasn't been done quite up to expectations. How many of you live under that abiding pressure, whether you're sober or not, but that abiding pressure that somehow I failed, somehow it's not good enough. Somehow you're spending your whole life trying to get approval and the stamp of approval that you're okay from somebody who maybe doesn't have it to give. And often somebody who's dead. And yet we're still marching through our life trying to get approval from someone. 1 to 10, how do you rate yourself on that one? All right, now here's the last one I want to suggest. And of course there could be thousands of them, but a very, very real one. Workaholism. Sometimes in Al-Anon that's called the craziness of the busies. But what I mean by workaholism is that you're always busy, or the projects are more important than people. The syndrome that no matter what I get done or how much I get done, I never celebrate it. It's like it's never over, that there's just a split second between the finish of one project and starting another one. It's like there's always 5 million things to do. Well, sober or not, if you can never catch up, you're always behind. There's never time for enjoyment. There's never time for fun. There's never time for you, and somehow that is not met, that is not addressed. Well, look at the kind of pain that happens in your life. Chemicals medicate pain. And if we don't work a program that focuses on that pain, then what are we left with? Now, if any of you has, again, a 1 to 5 or a 1 to 10 there, 5 would be nice, but this goes all the way up to 10. Sometimes when you do this exercise, people say, God, I'm a 15 on most of these things. Well, take one of your high numbers. I want to give you a small step-by-step process. What do you do about it? Because pointing out problems without offering remedies does little good. So when you get in your discussion groups, or if you're not in a group, learning to share this with somebody else, put on the top line of a piece of paper, here is the living issue that I know I need to deal with. This is a living issue that if I do not deal with it, it's going to cause and is causing significant pain in my life. Put it up there. All right. Now here's some steps. Number one, I would like you to write down then, relative to this issue, what have you learned is your expectation about that issue? So for example, if you put workaholic up there, what I'm asking you to do then, number two, is write out, what have you learned is your expectation about being busy? What have you learned about is your responsibility never to stop working, or that leisure is bad? See, what did you learn about that? Those living issues didn't just fall out of a tree somehow. You know, codependents do not fall out of trees fully formed at age 30. We practice them, we learn them. All right, here's number three that I'd like to suggest for you to do. Write down what is the most slippery people, place, and time around this issue. Because if we're going to avoid that issue, to grow through that issue, learning what to avoid is important. Is there certain people that if you are around them, they really pull your trigger in terms of professionalism, in terms of being a perfectionist, a procrastinator, anger? Then keep away from those people. Where are the slippery people, the slippery places, the slippery times in your life? And we need to learn to keep away from them. All right, here's the next step. Again, figuring out how to get past this. What is it that you need to do to remedy that issue? If it's a workaholic, then you need to take time off. If it's fear of anger, then you need to speak up for yourself and find out that you aren't going to die and nobody's going to kill you. If it's fear of abandonment, then perhaps what you need to do is to spend a night alone, truly working on your head and find out, I'm okay alone. Not only do I not have a fear of abandonment, what I find out is I can be by myself and not suffer the pains of hell. So what are the steps, the practice steps that if you do them on a regular daily basis, you find out that you outgrow these? You don't have to stay victim to that kind of pain. Chemicals medicate pain. If all we do is wind up taking away the chemical, then what is left? And the greatest denial in the world is to think that 85% of our recovery is not dealing with those living issues. But in order to do that, we need to know what those living issues are. We need to understand where they came from. What is the learning that I am fighting against so that I don't have to keep doing the same behavior, repeating the same cycles? What is the positive behavior that I need to do on a regular basis to learn that new skill? See, and then of course, the last step is we need to keep at it. Once a workaholic takes time off and keeps taking time off, pretty soon we will get to become comfortable with leisure. When a perfectionist makes a mistake or is not perfect and learns it's not the end of the world and can still bless themselves and sing a song, if they practice that, they will become people comfortable with their own imperfection. If we keep at it, we become whatever it is that we practice. But believe this, and think about this. Underneath the addiction in all of us is the living problem. Every chemical-dependent person is also codependent. Codependency simply means focusing on the living problems. We can do it. The degree of freedom and joy we have in our life is our own decision, and we deserve the best. We will summarize this lecture in 3 questions. And after each one of these lectures, I try to summarize all of the material to help focus the discussion, because I think, as we all know, the more you discuss it, the more you share it, the more insight and the more internalization happens. Therefore, let me suggest this question. In what way is every chemically dependent person also codependent? Think about that, talk about it, tear it apart until you truly understand it. The second question is, in what way have you used chemicals to medicate your pain? You see, the question is, what is the pain that you tried to deal with, to run away from, to drown in the chemical? Was the pain around repressed anger? Was the pain around difficulty with intimacy? Was the pain around fear, low self-esteem? The fact is that we need to understand the way we use those chemicals and what pain we tried to cover up, because they remain. They are still there. And here's the third question. What specifically is the living problem that you need to focus your program on? What is the focus of your program? You see, and the point is, the more focused we get with our program, the more effective it is going to be. So take the time to really dig into those 3 questions. How is every chemically dependent person also codependent? In what way personally have you used the use of chemicals to cover up the pain in your life? And what is the specific focus of your program on a specific living issue? What is that living issue? The more you discuss them, the more you understand them. The more you understand them, the more power you have to change.